Welcome to Calvary's fall teaching series called Engage, Living and Loving Like Jesus in Your Everyday Relationships. Thank you so much for joining us for this fall small group curriculum. And thank you, Pastor Sean, for doing this, for sitting down with us and helping us dig more deeply into this topic.
I always love doing this, Carolyn. I think it's a great opportunity for each of us to grow deeper in our walk with Jesus and how we reflect Him in the world.
I'm really excited about this series because relationships are pretty much the key to our life.
Yeah, no matter what we do in the morning when we get up, we're going to face relationships. We're going to face our family, our coworkers, our neighbors. It's a part of our everyday lives.
So what is the main takeaways you're hoping people will get out of this series?
Well, the main thing I think is, as we talk at Calvary a lot about living and loving like Jesus, that can be a rallying motto. People love that concept, and yet it can remain in theory. If we don't just think about how does this really work out in life? How am I going to live and love like Jesus with the people around me every day with whom I have relationships? And so this takeaway for me in this series is going to be, how do we engage well for Jesus in our everyday lives with those around us in each moment of every day?
So this is a 6-week series. So we had to look at Jesus' interactions with all these people throughout the Gospels and land on 6 qualities, or DNA markers, as we've come to call them. How were you able to determine which 6 to focus on?
Well, it isn't easy because this process has taken some time. You've been a part of that, others on our team, and you can come up with dozens and dozens of qualities of how we should engage with the world around us so they see Jesus in us. But we started to see some of them overlapped.
Yes.
Some of them were really kind of a sub-thought to the main thought. And then we also said we wanted this to be a 6 to 8 week series where folks could wrap their heads around some core DNA markers that would get rooted in their lives, that would help the others grow as well. So we came down to these 6 because I think they encapsulate kind of the core of what it means to live and love like Jesus in the world in our everyday relationship. But this discussion we get to have that hopefully sparks some discussion for others in small groups, I think it'll stir up for all of us those areas that we would naturally know and say, oh yeah, that's one I'm weak on and that one I'm strong on. But there may be some areas we say, oh, I thought I was better than I was on this, but now when I see this quality in this setting where Jesus is interacting with a specific individual, wow, I really don't have that quality. I need that.
This is why it's so great that we get to do this in small groups together,
Yep.
because it's kind of a check to say, hey, I think I'm really needing to improve here. And sometimes people around us can say, no, actually, you're good there, but hey, let's work on this piece here. So it's a great way to have community and accountability. And hopefully those conversations will be happening in our groups. So let's get started. It seems really appropriate that the first one right out of the box is peacemakers, because gosh, our world, it just so seems to be in need of this more than ever. But in Jesus' day, those were turbulent times as well.
Yeah, the tension we face in our world and in our culture and some of the political strife and
the polarization,
that's occurred can be felt in families, can be felt in churches, can be felt in friendships, at work. It's there. But in Jesus' day, the tensions were just as strong, and in some ways even stronger because there were multiple layers to it. You had the Roman laws and the Roman leadership being an oppressive force over top of the Jewish leadership in Palestine, who were trying to carry out their own laws and rules. And then you had the average people who, some are aligning a little more with Rome, some with the Jewish leadership. And there's just a lot of tension back and forth in Christ's culture. And yet he becomes this peacemaker in the midst of that. He was the one, no matter if it was a political thing, it was a family thing, it was somebody who was just upset with the religious leaders, that somehow he always brought a calm into those situations.
Does some of that calm have to do with the fact that he knows who he is and his identity is so secure?
Yep. And so he knew his identity, he knew he was sent from God, and he knew his mission. He had that cross in his mind, and he knew what he was going to be doing for all humanity in his death on the cross, his burial, and his resurrection. So he knows his identity and he knows his mission. And we, as the followers of Christ, to be peacemakers in this world, need to know our identity, and we need to understand our mission, and then we can go into any circumstance, any situation, into any aspect of our relationships, and we can bring an assurance, a certainty, a calm, because we're connected to our identity and our mission in Jesus.
So let's talk about that. In your message this week, you taught on Matthew 26, 36 to 56, and you compared and contrasted Judas' betrayal of Jesus with Peter cutting off the ear of the guard.
Yeah.
And they look like two really different sorts of interactions.
Yeah,
and
one
yet,
looks like something kind and gentle and loving, and one looks like
Yes.
something violent and divisive and aggressive, and yet they're both divisive and aggressive, and Jesus brings a calm to both.
Yeah, so explain that to us. How does that work out? What is it that's going on for both of them that is the same? And they're trying to control Jesus, trying to control the environment?
Yes, Judas is known as a zealot, which in that milieu of all those voices and tensions in the culture that day, he is a part of the people who are trying to maybe attack a Roman soldier, and that would get Rome to respond in force, and then the Jewish people revolt, and maybe they'll overthrow Rome. So he's that kind of person.
So he's a political agenda.
He's got a political agenda. That's where he's coming from. Whereas Peter, on the other hand,
Right.
was a fisherman. He was
He's the hothead,
he
right?
he was the hardworking, quick-tempered, bold to action. Act before you think kind of guy. And but yet he is very committed to Jesus.
Right.
So committed that when they come and that kiss comes and the guard, the soldiers seek to arrest Jesus, he pulls out a sword and cuts off Malchus, one of the soldiers' ears, and that's a part of his allegiance to Jesus. He's trying to defend Jesus, but in both cases, with the kiss, Jesus doesn't fight back.
Right.
He allows the guard to approach him. He's going to allow them to take him. He knows this is part of God's plan, it's part of his mission. And then in the situation with Peter, literally Jesus reaches to the ground, picks up that ear, and reattaches it to the man that it belonged to. And he brings a calm immediately where Peter was trying to create conflict and the tension because out of defense for Jesus.
So is there any parallels for us today on that? That as Christians sometimes do we force it in ways
Yeah.
that where we're not a blessing or a peacemaker to our culture?
I think we can adopt human agendas and even the agendas of our world and the voices around us like Judas did and like Peter did. And what we need to do in our walk with God, we need to make sure we understand his mission and why we're here. And we have to separate that from our politics. We have to separate that from our families of origin. We have to separate that from our career, from our social media, and say, okay, in all these avenues of my relationships, how am I to represent Jesus as a peacemaker? How am I to be the one that brings certainty and calm and clarity in the midst of all this noise and tension and in some ways chaos?
So our kingdom values and our agenda, for the lack of a better word, our mission with Jesus takes precedent over maybe our deeply held political beliefs or
Yes.
whatever else that might be dividing
yes,
us?
Yeah, so we've got to come to a point as Christians who live in this great land. I'm proud to be an American. I love our nation, the freedoms we have, and I celebrate those who have fought for that. But we have to make sure that we allow our Christianity to shape our politics, not to allow our politics to shape our Christianity.
So to some people, they think Jesus looks weak or passive. I mean, even in the stories that we just covered, he doesn't let the ear stay off. He doesn't incite violence. He doesn't run away from Judas or, call him on it. He allows himself to be taken. He allows himself to go through this. So they can look at that and think, that looks kind of weak or passive.
Yeah.
There's times he doesn't show up for every fight that the Pharisees want him in.
Right.
So what's the balance of that? How do you know when you kind of stand up? Or how does Jesus do this, where he maintains his peacemaking at all times, and yet he stands up too?
So he's not weak in the sense we think of weak, and in the situation like where he puts the ear back on, rather than saying, "Thank you, Peter, you're with me, you're my man, let's go, we can take on these guards that have come to take me and put me in jail and try me. We'll fight back." The reason he doesn't do that is the same reason why when he's in a conflict with religious leaders and they start to threaten him, you'll read in Scripture he slipped out of the crowd, or he slipped away because he knew his hour had not yet come. He clearly understood his mission, and he clearly knew what his agenda was. That was a kingdom agenda. And I think for us, the key to being a peacemaker is not the demeanor. It's not, are we weak? Are we quiet? Are we soft? Are we gentle? The key to being a peacemaker is about the agenda. When you are operating by the kingdom agenda that is laid out for us in Scripture and given to us in the New Testament, particularly for our era, when you are living out that agenda, then you are going to be a peacemaker.
There's a verse that I've been convicted by over and over throughout my life. I think it started with my parents probably quoted it to me, but it's Romans 12:18, and the NLT version says, "Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone." And the NIV says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone."
Right.
And it's so convicting because everyone, really?
Everyone. And I like how the NIV says, and the text implies this very clearly, that as far as you have control over it.
Yes.
Where I don't control your reaction. I don't control my neighbor's reaction. I don't control
Your
my
kids.
wife's, my kids, my coworkers. But I am to be responsible for what is on my side of the street, if you will.
Right.
And you're responsible for that which is on your side of the street in this relationship.
So let's break that verse down. It's basically two parts, right? The first part is our part, and I like what you said about on our side of the street. So we clean up our side of the street.
Right.
So that I look at as business with me and God.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, okay, Lord, have I done everything I can do? And sometimes He asks me to do more. And then I have to sit on that for a while and get over my rebellion and then do more. Or sometimes I do have a sense of peace where I go, you know what, in that situation, you did the best you could, and then now you need to just trust me and release it, have patience with it. Mm-hmm. So I think that piece has to do with dealing with God on it. Right. And then the second piece is the everyone part, and that's really hard because we do try to and want to control people's responses. And maybe on that part, it's almost as much about tone and attitude as it is about what we say.
Yeah, and it's, again, goes back to what we were talking about with understanding that in every one of our relationship dimensions that we experience, that we are there not just to be the parent, not just to be the coworker, not just to be the neighbor. We are there to be Jesus in the lives of our kids. We are there to be Jesus in the workplace. We are there to reflect and be Christ in our neighborhood.
Okay, so let's really go where the rubber meets the road. Okay. How does this work itself out in some of those difficult situations? So for you, Sean, when you get emails that are just stinging and so unfair, because I read a few of those.
Yeah, they come every now and then.
They do come. How do you respond as a peacemaker there?
Well, at first, I try to pause. You try to take some time.
That's always good.
Because if we just do a quick response, then we're going to do what Peter did. Mm-hmm. He didn't stop and think it through and think about what is Jesus trying to accomplish, what do we just have in the upper room, what did he say was going to happen. No, he just pulls out a sword and cuts off the man's ear in response that was not thought out. So I think the pause is very important for us. And so I try to reply, one, by pausing, two, by thinking about, okay, how will my response advance Christ's kingdom agenda?
Sometimes we aren't the ones instigating the conflict or stirring up the tension, but we kind of, by our behavior, our demeanor, or by our words, we kind of just let it happen or foster it. So here's an example. I'll just confess it. So my daughter, as anyone who's watched a number of these know, plays volleyball, and we have one more year left. But on the bleachers of a sporting event, and for me on the bleachers there, I can hear people gossiping about a coach or a player,
or and it's another parent.
It's negative, and it's juicy stuff. But I really have had to think about, okay, what does it look like to be a gentle here? What does it look like to be a peacemaker here? Be someone that everyone on the team could see is not engaging, not trash talking, kind of just cheering and trying to stay in my lane, and that's not easy, and that's a very practical thing I struggle with.
Right.
But there's other places and other environments where we unintentionally maybe get sucked into drama or bullying or gossip.
Well, even in your workplace, a lot of folks feel like they have to play that game to be able to advance their career. If you're not in on trashing so-and-so or saying the negative stuff about this person, then that may advance someone ahead of you who is willing to play that game.
Right.
And yet we as the followers of Christ need to be peacemakers, even when it doesn't advance us the way we want to be advanced, because this isn't about our agenda, it's about his agenda.
I think sometimes maybe we think mistakenly that we can convince somebody.
Oh, yeah.
So if you see something that
we'll
you think
argue them to Jesus.
Right, but then 2 Timothy 2:23-26 says, don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights. That a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be kind to everyone, able to teach and be patient with difficult people. So this whole quarrelsomeness, I don't know a single person that has been convinced to Jesus, to faith, by someone arguing at them on Facebook.
Yeah, pointing your finger, shouting. And that verse is a verse that if folks who are hearing us say, oh, that verse, wow, that's convicting, you might need to memorize that verse. And when you're tempted to post something, before you post it, stop and think about that passage that talks about how we're not to be quarrelsome. That should not be the mark. We are not to be known by our quarrelsomeness. We're to be known by how we are peacemakers.